Hello, everyone. Welcome to FiredUp, the podcast for marketers working in early and late stage startups. Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to FiredUp. It's great to see you all. And my name is Morgan McLintic. And today we're going to be talking all about messaging in the AI era because it has changed and we're going to explore why. And to do that, I am joined by Chris Ulbrich. Hey, Chris.
Hello there.
And by Nicole Pytel. Hello, Nicole.
Hi, everybody.
So you don't fully control your brand's message anymore, if you ever did, but it's got worse because of ChatGPT and Perplexity and Claude amalgamating messages about your company and repackaging it to your target audience. That's a new dynamic and an increasingly important one. It has implications for your messaging. And so that's the topic we want to explore today. Nicole, to start with you, I feel like startups have always, to an extent, struggled with messaging consistency, right?
Yeah, it's always a problem. We see it with every client that comes in through the door that is earlier stage. We see some messaging issues, and it's totally understandable. You know, these are small teams, and nobody has ever sat down and put pen to paper and said, how do we explain ourselves? How do we explain what the company is and what the product does and what do we do and why do we do it and how do we do it? In startups, everybody tends to have their own opinion. They all talk about it very differently. And we've seen that when we do messaging workshops with our own clients, you talk to people one-on-one, you may talk to 4 people and get 4 totally different conversations when they're all asked the same thing. So there's no consistency there. Startups tend to talk more about the features and the product rather than what you get out of from using it. So there's more of this what and how going on than a why. And that causes a little bit of confusion for potential customers who are like, but I can't envision myself using this, or what does this actually do for my business? So it's always been a struggle for startups. And that's why having a messaging house is so important. It's even more important right now because if your message is not crystal clear and very consistent and reinforced across every single touch point, when somebody asks AI about you, AI is not going to have a snippet to pull from to explain. So AI is going to kind of fill in that gap of what it thinks your company and your product are all about.
And now you used the phrase there, messaging house. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's really just a document that explains, how do we describe the company? How do we describe the product? What are our differentiators? How are we different from our competitors? And what's the elevator pitch? How do we talk about ourselves so that when somebody says, hey, I work for XYZ startup, oh, well, what do you do? Everybody's got the same answer. And then that answer is reinforced across your website, in ads, just all these channels, your boilerplate on press releases. It's everywhere. And if you've got the same thing everywhere, then no matter where AI is pulling from, you have a higher chance of your message being part of that output rather than AI's interpretation of what it thinks your message is.
Chris, we often see this on the PR side where a company is coming to announce its funding. Maybe it's the seed funding or Series A, whatever stage it is, because I think your messaging will evolve at each of these stages. And one of the first questions I'll ask is, okay, can we see the messaging? Because your media narrative is going to be different than your marketing messaging, but let's just see it. And normally it doesn't exist. So one of the first parts of that project is, all right, let's take a step to build out the marketing messaging, and then we can build our narrative from there, right?
Right. And we know that AI likes news coverage as a source. It's all the more important when you are coming up on a major moment in the history of your company. And certainly a launch announcement or early funding announcement is going to fit that description. you should bear in mind that whatever messaging you're issuing and whatever messaging gets into that story is likely going to be the messaging that shows up for some time to come in AI search. That does suggest that if you haven't done the kind of work that Nicole was describing, this is the moment to do it, to get clear, because the consequences of what you decide at this moment in your marketing program you're going to be living with that for some time to come.
Right. To test this out, you can put into ChatGPT, what do you think about my company? In the same way as people might Google their own brand or their own name, ask ChatGPT what it thinks about you. And I did this recently about Firebrand, and, it's picking up sources that I've never heard of. For example, when I said, list me, I was talking about PR agencies. I said, list me some of the startup PR agencies. We came up and had little stars next to them, 3 out of 5, 4.7 out of 5. And I asked it, where are these rankings coming from? Is that coming from the engine itself, or is it coming from a third party? Anyway, turns out it came from a directory. This directory is called Tech Behemoths, not a directory that most of, I think, buyers are looking at, but there are lots of these. This particular one gave us 3 out of 5 stars. And I wondered about that because I would like 5 stars, please. And, that's just their default, right? If you haven't really set up a profile there, you haven't directed your customers to review you there, you start at 3. And, if anybody else gets 1, they get 5, right? So it's small and kind of random, but it's earthing itself within ChatGPT and informing what it thinks about that brand. So even though I may not think, no disrespect to Tech Behemoths, as I'm just using them as an example, even though I might not think my potential clients are going to that directory to find a potential partner, they are going to ChatGPT to find a potential partner, and that is informing what people might think about us. And I would imagine that is not uncommon. So directories are one of the citation sources, and they'll rank you and they'll have pros and cons about your company that you have no idea about until you go and sort of take GEO, Generative Engine Optimization, seriously and start seeing what's happening inside that visibility. So, the current status is your messaging in the AI era is being informed by multiple sources that you don't control and may not be aware of. And you need to get across that and do something proactive about it. And so, as Chris says, the media is a huge part of that.
It seems like there are really 3 components to this process. 1, you have to understand what your message is, what the message you're trying to get across is. 2, you need to understand what sources are influencing your reputation and the narrative about you that people are getting through AI. And 3, you have to have a plan for influencing those sources. And so any one of those components of the whole project are not really going to do much for you on their own. You really need to have all 3 in play.
When people think about messaging and a messaging exercise, I often think they feel like it's some kind of existential long process where everyone sort of, thinks about what they want to be when they grow up. But it doesn't need to take that long, right, Nicole? For instance, if we're doing a messaging exercise, it's a 4 to 6, it could be 6 weeks. It depends on people's availability, but this is a fairly quick process. If someone wants to do their messaging, what's the main sort of process there that we might advise?
Yeah, so I think the first thing you need to decide is which cooks are you bringing into the kitchen? And this has to be a very selective list, because if you bring in, 10 or 12 people, we all know what happens when there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. So you pick 3 or 4 people who are going to kind of own this project and weigh in on it and actively work on it with you. What we like to do is take those people, interview them individually, ask them all the same 10 or 12 questions, and see what their answers are. And most of the time, the answers are very, very different. People working together, they live and die by the work that they're doing, and they're all talking about it in a totally different way. So that's one thing that we always spot. Also kind of digging into, well, what do they think the company's value is? What do they think makes the company different? Things like that. What do prospects think when they first come in the door? What kind of sales education is needed? How much sales education is needed? And you talk about all of those things. And then what we like to do is go back and really build out kind of a work in progress messaging house of here's what you said. And based on everything that everybody said and everything that we know about your company, here's what we think the messaging house could look like. And then we bring those cooks back into the kitchen. We go through it all and we talk through it. And it's very much a collaborative working session where we hammer it all out. And I think every single time, everybody's really surprised by how differently they were talking about the exact same thing. It's a very big aha moment to see, a slide of here's how you described it. Here's how you described it. Here's how you described it. And that's really when it all comes together. But to your point, Morgan, this is not a long process. Like you said, a lot of it kind of just depends on everybody's calendar availability. But if you've got, 30 minutes for an initial interview for each person and an hour or two for a working session, you can get a full-fledged message house done.
Yeah. And we're talking here about getting internal consistency around the messaging. We're not talking about some more strategic positioning, brand identity project, which would take longer. What the priority right now is to get internal consistency so that you are radiating the same messages out to all the different places that your buyer is going to find you and AI is going to find you so that they can come up with a correct interpretation of what you want. Now, that might change if you go through a more strategic repositioning or rebrand, but what we're talking about here is just get everybody on the same page so that in this AI era, you have that first part. What we want to say is consistent. Then, as Chris said, the second part here is, look, you got to find out what AI is saying about you, because whether you know it or not, your buyers are at that top of funnel doing their research about you and your competitors.
And what sources it's drawing on.
Exactly, what the citation sources. And most of the tools, SEMrush, AIO, or Scrunch, or whatever you want, are going to say what the citation sources are. And 27% is journalistic and 33% other brands. And this is a GEO play, right? But at least you can then track down your version of tech behemoths and decide whether or not you want to correct it. But I think that's really important. And then you're into, all right, how do we then start to adapt this? And often it is about your brand forever has been living in the minds of your prospects and your customers, and you haven't had full control over it. This is what we're talking about in the early days of social media. You're no longer in control of your brand. And I think AI has accelerated that, but it's repackaging it in a way that we haven't seen before.
Well, right. And I think that has important implications for marketing, because with GEO as opposed to SEO, with SEO, you were trying to get your preferred sources of information about yourself into the top areas of consideration, those top 5 SERPs, right? But the user experience of interacting with a search engine is to see different sources of information and click one and click the other. Each of those sources of information is understood to be its own. I think you intuitively understand that it's its own independent thing. What's unique about AI, or new about AI, is that it will condense and synthesize all these different sources and come up with one sort of magisterial opinion that takes precedence over any other. So it takes all the sources that you might find in a search engine, but it doesn't represent each of them independently. It decides using whatever is going on inside its reasoning, what aspects of the message to privilege, whose view of your brand to privilege, whether it's yours or somebody else's. Something's going to come out on top because the AI is speaking to you the way, more or less the way a human would. And a human, if you said, well, what do you know about brand X? They would say, well, I've heard various things, but this is the gist of it.
Right. And it's also because of the way that they work, picking up sources that are deeper in the search SERPs than you would expect. I mean, for a traditional SEO, it's pretty clear what's on page 1 on SERP 1. And, if there's something that you don't want to be informing your prospects, you've got to knock that down so that it gets less traffic. Here, it's pulling all sorts of different citation sources, some of them quite old blog posts, some of them from your competitors. Nicole, one of the tactics that we've seen at the moment is companies using those sort of listicles and competitive battle card pages to deposition their competitors. So literally your competitors are informing the messaging or corrupting the messaging that you've got right directly to your prospects. I mean, how do you battle that?
With your own listicle. That's what we're telling our clients to do. And we've done a lot of digging into this. We've worked with a data scientist on this. And you're right. Those competitor listicle pages, that the top 10, whatever SaaS platforms out there. And of course, whoever publishes it is going to list themselves as number 1. And all of their competitors are going to be listed. And it's your competitor's interpretation of what you are and what your value is and what makes you different. So the answer is to go out and create a page of your own. There's a lot of companies that are afraid to do this because they feel like, oh, well, we don't want to get in the mud with our competitors. We don't want to call them out. And these aren't really call out pages. The ones that are ranking are quite neutral to a point because you're going to rank yourself number 1. But, nobody's outwardly trashing anybody else. But if you don't have a page like this, your competitors do. And so when somebody asks ChatGPT, hey, what's the best whatever platform out there? And it surfaces your competitor's listicle page, they're going to look better than you. And your messaging is not going to be in there. So create your own page, even if it's an orphan page on your website. If you don't want it to be navigable, that's okay. It's really a GEO play. Right now, we're seeing those types of pages work very, very, very well. Now, will the LLMs catch on to that because everybody's doing it? Yeah. Maybe. But for now, we're still in this Wild West era of the AI era. And for now, it works. So for now, let's do it.
There's also that strategy that Winter has taken where they are doing a similar tactic where they've got a page just about their own company, like a backgrounder. When are we founded? What do we do? Who are our main customers? What's the proposition? How many people have we got? Like an FAQ in some ways. And they've quite sort of cheeky, I think, put it in the footer as sort of AI bots read about us over here. It's fun. But that as a sort of profile page that you're trying to, in a very sort of schema, easily accessed format, provide the raw facts about your company, you probably want that because your competitor might be saying, hey, your brand is expensive. And that really gets under people's skin. We're not expensive, but you can have a section on your about page here that does talk about price and goes into a lot of detail that can maybe be used to offset that. And again, you can decide, do you want to link this and make it navigable to other people, or do you just want it to be available for the AI crawlers? That's up to you. But those tactics at the moment are being used to inform the AI search, which I think is really interesting. Let's talk about, though, we're trying to get consistent in AI search, and you're going to buy a tool and we're going to have everybody on the same page, and then we're going to go after all these different citation sources. Is that really worth it? And are buyers actually using AI chatbots to come to your site. And, a couple of developments here. If you are a HubSpot user, you will see now in your traffic sources dashboard, they've actually broken out AI search as one of the lead sources. So, you've got direct and you've got traditional search, and they'll show the traffic that comes from your emails, etc. But now AI search, it has its own little line. And if you click on that, it'll show you the number of impressions that you've had. And it will show you which leads, how many leads, conversions you got from AI search. And so this is a real channel, a meaningful channel. And now for your brand, if you're a HubSpot user, you can easily see that. You have been able to see it for a long time if you've put some custom views on in GA4. But now, I think it dates back to September. You can easily see with a click of a couple of buttons how much traffic that you're getting. And we found some good data here from one of the sort of AI search monitoring platforms, company called Goody, about what the traffic does when it comes from search and does it convert. And this data dates back to March, so it's a little older, but they looked at 117,000 leads. I think they're across about 13 different companies, different stages in different sectors. So a lot of leads, not a lot of companies. But what they were doing is just seeing how much traffic comes from ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity compared to Google and Bing. And then does that traffic convert to leads? Does it go into MQLs, SQLs, ops, and closed won? So the traditional sort of funnel, if you like. And I thought this was pretty interesting. And so just to sort of unpack that for you, and we'll provide the link to this page. But unsurprisingly, here, 58% of the traffic comes from Google. Google is still massive. And if you look in your HubSpot dashboard, you'll see pretty much the same thing. Only 5.8 came from ChatGPT. And I can tell you from our analysis, when we're looking at AI sources, it's ChatGPT and then sort of everybody else, isn't it? I think, Nicole, we're starting to see Perplexity move up a little bit. But the game, when we're talking about AI traffic, we're mainly talking about ChatGPT here, right?
We're mainly talking about ChatGPT, exactly. Perplexity is growing a tiny bit in what we're seeing with clients, but ChatGPT is still the 800-pound gorilla. But ChatGPT is dwarfed by Google. We get questions, is SEO dead? No, not at all. Google is still getting very much the lion's share of search. ChatGPT's share of that is smaller. Maybe those numbers are a little bit different in the tech world, where if you're a tech buyer, maybe you're more likely to use ChatGPT than the average web searcher. But Google is still the big dog, and ChatGPT is down there, but ChatGPT is the big dog of the AI platforms.
I mean, these are B2B SaaS brands that Goody has been sort of analyzing. And it says that, Google's 10 times in terms of traffic, what ChatGPT is. But, ChatGPT is twice what Bing is. So it's overtaken the number 2 traditional search engine. But the interesting thing here is, if you look down that funnel, you see that the overall leads are less, but those leads close at a higher rate. So the leads that were created by ChatGPT and went all the way down to closed won, the rate was 4.1% compared to 2.2% for Google search. So what that says to us is that the leads coming from ChatGPT are better quality and more likely to close. And I would infer from that then that these prospects are doing their research more extensively in ChatGPT. And then when they come to your site and convert, they've made more of their decision that you're the right fit. So they're coming in more qualified than had they just found you on a Google search.
It's impossible to know, right? We're all inferring. I think that what you just said, that is a possible explanation. That is very much the kind of explanation that we deployed a lot in the heyday of SEO. We would talk about at what point, how educated was the buyer when they reach your website? What's the next step, moving them down the funnel? I wonder, though, with ChatGPT, Perplexity, other forms of AI, whether there might not be another factor at work, and that is that people are treating the AI like a trusted reference, like they're getting referred in by someone that they trust. My guess is that most of this traffic is coming off of prompts like, give me a short list of vendors that are best at such and such. The same way you might ask, give me 5 well-regarded restaurants in this area for me to go have dinner with my wife on Friday. So on the theory that a lot of, if not most of these prompts are for short lists of well-regarded vendors that do the thing I want it to do, then that's a whole new sort of element for marketers to take into consideration, because now you have an automated source of recommendation that people are trusting it the way they would trust a human. It's not even an aggregator. In fact, it might be aggregating reviews, but people aren't treating it that way. They're treating it like they got a tip from someone they know and trust. And probably anyone listening or watching this has observed the phenomenon either in themselves or people close to them, that at this point in the evolution of AI and people's encounters with AI, a lot of people give a lot of credence to what they hear from an AI, more than they would Google, more than they would other online services. There's something about the conversational approach of a chatbot, or hearing the same information from a chatbot. It makes you more comfortable with its conclusions. I wonder if there is something similar at work as when you hear your favorite podcaster advertising a product. I'm listening to, it's the spooky season, I'm listening to a horror podcast that's produced locally, and the host is pushing every 10 minutes functional CBD gummies. Well, I guarantee you, I have never considered having functional gummies in my life. I will say that after a week of taking my walks, listening to this podcast, getting one of my favorite podcasters in my ear talking about functional gummies, I'm like, functional gummies, okay, maybe.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Chris. The data that we have is limited when it comes to AI. It's not like Google, where Google will tell you, you got this many impressions, you're ranking for these keywords. The AI platforms are not telling us that. The data that we do have that we can look at is what happens when this traffic arrives on your site. One of the things that we do in our monthly reporting for clients is we compare that AI-driven traffic to the rest of the traffic that arrived on the site during the month. And while it's a much smaller percentage of the total number of sessions that happened that month, what we're seeing across the board, and especially for clients that do have a formalized GEO strategy, is that traffic is more engaged. Their engagement rate in GA4 is higher. Their time they're spending on the site is higher. Typically, the conversion rate for those people is higher than the site as a whole. So it does bear out, whether it's a trusted partner or however you want to look at it, that the people that are arriving are lower in the funnel and they're more ready to engage with your brand, perhaps because their trusted buddy told them to go check it out.
Yeah.
And I think what's going to be an interesting development here, we have just seen the launch of OpenAI's Atlas browser. So ChatGPT is going to come alongside on the journey with your buyer onto your website. And so, yes, they're hitting you more informed when they come to your site, and you want your messaging that was in ChatGPT to be the same when they come to your site. So there's not some kind of, dissonance there and then they bounce out. But also ChatGPT is now going to be, okay, summarize this page for me. And, I have some questions about this site. I'm just going to ask you whilst I'm here. And so it'll be interesting to see how that changes the nature of websites and user behavior on your site and the content that you want to put as a marketer up there. Obviously, you want to make sure that it's, highly accessible so that ChatGPT can sort of see the content and answer the questions. But I do think that's going to have a big impact on what you say on your site. It's still a small percentage of your overall traffic. So, don't tear up your website, but the impact of these browsers with all the history that they have had with that user as they come to your site are going to now be informing them when they're on the site. It's not like they're in a AI search and then they stopped and they're in that sort of a traditional browsing behavior, because it might not be.
Right. And that's why, your messaging should always have been very clear, very definitive. It should be immediately obvious when somebody lands on your website what you do and why it's important and why you're better than the competition. This has just upped the ante a bit, especially, you got to think about AI has gotten us very, very used to just instant answers, instant gratification. And if people are arriving on your website, whether they got there from AI or not, they're in that mindset. And if I arrive on your site and I don't know what you do or why you're different or why you're better or how you make my job easier, I'm not going to click around and search for those answers. If the answers are just kind of piecemeal across a bunch of pages or there's no cohesive messaging, I'm not going to stick around to find out. I'm going to go with the vendor who clearly explained to me how this is going to help me and my business and why they're better than everybody else.
Just thinking about that, because of the nature of the LLMs, where they're fanning out, they're looking at multiple sources and they're sort of aggregating and resynthesizing the messaging and presenting that about your company. One implication of that might be that you might want slightly more sort of spiky messaging, more innovative, like coining new phrases, things that are not easy for the LLM to just smooth out, so that when it's talking about your brand, it is forced to mention the phrases about your approach that other companies don't have. So, for example, we talk about multiplier marketing, and ChatGPT is going to need to mention that when you're talking about our brand, because that's our thing. There's a lot of pages and content about it on our site. If you don't have those kind of spiky individual things that are going to pull through in the LLM, then it might be something to phase into your marketing so that it stands out to your prospects. And then when they come to your site, there's that linkage there and they're more likely to convert. But maybe I'm just making that up.
No, you're right. You hit all the points.
All right. So I actually think that sort of spikiness in the messaging is quite a good thing for marketers. You're going to see a little bit more verve and a little bit more individualism as companies try and sort of penetrate the LLMs. So just to summarize here, when it comes to messaging in the AI era, number one, you need to be really consistent with your messaging more than you have ever before. And it needs to have the same kind of phrasing across all the different channels. Number two, when it comes to AI search specifically, you need to have good visibility into how that traffic, how those chatbots are summarizing your brand and informing your prospects. And number three, you need to have a great game plan to make sure that all that messaging is distributed in all the places that LLMs are going to find it, so that your competitors aren't saying that you're expensive, or so that some directory isn't saying that you've only got 3 out of 5 stars when you haven't touched it at all. That's not what you want. You want to make sure that you're getting out there and having a larger surface area for your brand. So that's a GEO play, and GEO is really favoring companies that invest in overall brand consistency and brand awareness in lots of different places. So it's rewarding them at the moment. So we also feel that perhaps some of this individualism should come through. So it's a great time to be a brand marketer. Chris, Nicole, thanks for your time. today. And thank you all for listening. Hopefully that was useful to you. And we will see you all again this time here next week.